All right, sports fans, how's everybody out there doing? William Martin coming at you one more time here on YouTube with another edition of the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge Podcast. Deontay Wilder traveled a long way to get beat as he didn't have an answer for Joseph Parker this past Saturday in Saudi Arabia. Parker beat Wilder by unanimous decision as the former heavyweight champion never had an answer for him. Parker, plain and simply, outboxed Wilder while cutting off the ring on a guy that at times looked like he didn't want to box. Now, might say, was Wilder looking ahead to facing Anthony Joshua, or did he just get beat? And honestly, at the end of the day, Deontay Wilder got beat by the better boxer on Saturday. From the beginning, it looked like Wilder was running around a little bit, and Parker was the one that was more aggressive. Typically, like most fights, regardless of the weight class, usually there tends to be a feeling out stage in the early rounds, and then once Parker felt out Wilder, understood what he could and couldn't do, he started to dictate things in the fight. And when it was all said and done, he got the victory. But honestly, it's one of those for me with Deontay Wilder. Ever since he stepped up his level of competition, things have changed for him. And I said this because even when Wilder was an undefeated heavyweight, you could see that he was really just looking for that one punch because that one punch is a very devastating punch, and it's been a very devastating punch when he was in the prime of his career as far as doing the damage because he dropped a lot of people with that power, behind that punch of his. But he's never improved. And I say this because Wilder has never had great footwork as a boxer. And it's something that has been a detriment to him as the level of competition that he has faced has gotten better. I thought that, it was very telling going back about 5 years, about 5.5 years rather, when Deontay Wilder had his first fight with Luis Ortiz, King Kong, and that was something where, yes, Wilder did get the victory, the TKO in the 10th round, but it was one of those where I felt like in round 6 and 7, King Kong had him. It was a scenario where Wilder was saved by the bell. King Kong got sloppy, and then it opened the door up for Wilder to do his damage. And of course, he came back and won that bout, won the rematch with Luis Ortiz as well. But then you look at the fights with Tyson Fury, and it's like, especially the second fight, because the first fight was a draw, really could have gone either way. And even in that fight, it was one of those where I think Fury got a lot of confidence after Wilder dropped him in the 12th round, and he felt like, what, he took Wilder's best punch, came back, trained harder, and was more dedicated. And we saw how Fury dominated that fight. And honestly, looking at it now with Deontay Wilder, he's now lost 3 out of his last 4 fights. You're talking about a 38-year-old boxer, and, like I said, he's never really had great footwork or technique. And maybe at this point, it's just caught up to him. For me, will Wilder ever be the same? At this point in the game, I doubt it. I mean, he's 38. He is who he is. Obviously, clearly, his prime years are, in the rearview mirror, technically. Probably, if he works hard, he could probably give you one or two more quality fights. But I think, in my opinion, at least, his best days inside the ring are behind him. And it's unfortunate because I look at it like this, and this is no fault of Deontay Wilder. I blame the people behind the scenes because we never, as boxing fans, got the fight that we wanted or the fight that we needed. And that fight with Anthony Joshua needed to happen 5 or 6 years ago, or maybe 7 years ago, for both of these guys. You're talking about two undefeated heavyweights that were in possession of all of the big titles at the heavyweight division. You had, one fighter from the United States, Deontay Wilder, repping Alabama, and then, of course, Anthony Joshua, representing the UK. It would have been a great story, but money. location, and the overall politics that have continued to hurt boxing won out. And it's unfortunate because, since then we've seen Joshua lose a couple of fights. We've seen Wilder, of course, lose a couple of fights. And I think because of that, even if that fight happens now, it has lost a lot of its sizzle. I mean, just think back 5 or 6 years ago. Could you imagine if you had a scenario with an undefeated Deontay Wilder taking on an undefeated Anthony Joshua, regardless if it was in Vegas, regardless if it was at the O2 Arena in London or even Wembley Stadium in London? Can you imagine the fanfare? Can you imagine how much money would have been put on that fight? Because the heavyweight division has been clamoring for that. Because there are people who don't know and might forget. Once upon a time, the heavyweight division was the glamour division of boxing, and it's just there for the taking for somebody to bring that back. And I really felt that that could have been the fight that would have done it. Joshua and Wilder more than likely are going to fight at this stage of the game, but honestly, it doesn't have the same sizzle like it once would have. But in his prime, Wilder, he took advantage of the heavyweight division. He dominated it, against the guys that were in there, and it's just unfortunate that, again, like I said, we just never got the fight that we really deserve. But to Joseph Parker, excuse me, to his credit, he came out there, he brought it. He was the better boxer, he was the better fighter. He outboxed him in every sense of the word, and that is why he got the win. And of course, for Wilder, he's licking his wounds after a tough fight. So let's see how Wilder is able to bounce back from this. BMW, you're saying to give it up, Deontay. It's one of those where, what, at this stage of the game, you might be right. I just obviously I don't know the man personally, but I will say this: I don't see him going out like that. I see him trying to go out on a positive note. Sometimes as athletes, you know, they're the last ones to know, when they don't have it anymore. You're saying homie can't fight. He just always has and relied on his power. Listen, it's one of those. He's always had that right hand cocked, and I've watched Wilder in person as well. It's one of those where what, he's had that right hand cocked, and it's been one of like to just do his damage, and it's one of those. It got him to that stage of the game, but it's one of those where again, no matter how good you are, you still have to adjust and adapt and work on your technique, and that's something that in his prime Wilder was never able to do. I'll give you an example. Obviously, clearly not a heavyweight wrestler. You look at Canelo Alvarez. Uh, Earlier in Alvarez's pro career, he was just trying to knock everybody out with one punch because he had been doing it for so long, and that got him to that stage of the game. But when you're getting up there and you're fighting the more established fighters, guess what? You're not going to be able to drop them with the one punch. And then he was getting winded, leaving himself open. So what did Canelo do? Canelo learned how to box more. Okay, and that's just one example. We've seen fighters adjust and adapt over the years. Going back to the heavyweight division, you think about Evander Holyfield, and one of the reasons why Evander Holyfield was able to survive as long as he did. Granted, he took a lot of hits. Don't get me wrong, but nonetheless, Evander knew how to adjust and adapt his game and his style. And that's, what helped to prolong his career and have success at that. Bernard Hopkins was another one. I mean, Bernard Hopkins was a guy, he was, his nickname was the executioner, but honestly, B Hop in the ring was more like a professor because he gave you lessons as far as, how things had to be. And, Hopkins was the master as far as, adjusting and adapting his style over the years. PMW saying, but fighters on a high level know that during the fight, you take away their strengths. Listen, Hopkins specialized in it. Andre Ward was another one that did it. And then, of course, most recently, we've seen it with Terrence Bud Crawford. The great ones know how to do it, but even just overall, because sometimes when you lose, you've got to go back to that drawing board. You have to make adjustments. to try to go out there and succeed. And the thing is, it's like Wilder never made those adjustments, and it's one of those where, and of course, Floyd was a master of it. I mean, you think back, Floyd, of course, hurting his hands earlier in his career because a lot of people forget Floyd when he was coming up. Floyd was more of a power puncher, and then Floyd Mayweather had to go out there and change things because he messed up his hands. And it's one of those where some people might want to say he runs in the ring, this, that, and the third. No, Floyd Mayweather became one of the better defensive boxers, and he knew how to frustrate people. And that was one of his biggest things. But again, at the end of the day, he knew how to adjust. That's one thing that Deontay Wilder never did. And it's one of those when you're in that heavyweight division, especially, you're taking on some big, strong guys. I mean, you figure Wilder's 6'7", probably like 2'5", 215 when he's stepping in there. But then when you step in there with a guy like Tyson Fury, especially that second fight, when Tyson Fury, I like arguably that's probably the best shape that he ever came into for a fight. And you're talking about a guy 6'9", anywhere between 275 to 300 that has strength, that has a chin, and could, take your punishment. That's a hard ask for a guy like Wilder. Obviously, the Klitschko brothers in their prime, two big fighters. Clearly, Wilder didn't have to deal with those guys, but nonetheless, I'm just using them as an example. You're also saying the level fighters find a way to win. Wilder is a one-trick pony. Listen, his staple has been that knockout punch, with the right hand, but he typically has tended to do it flat-footed. That's the thing about it. Like I said, it was effective against, boxers on a certain level, but when you step your game up, clearly, it was a difference. But I really want to see, I mean, obviously at this point of the game, like I said, he's not going to make any adjustments. I just think he's probably going to probably take the Joshua fight. It's going to be a money grab for both of them. But again, it's not going to have the same sizzle that it would have, 6 or 7 years ago. You're saying he's the David Tua of this era. Wow. That's a guy right there, like some boxing people forgot about. I'm happy that you brought him up. He had a chin for his era, but like you said, he could be the David Tua of this era. But nonetheless, um, it's probably going to be a money grab with Wilder and Joshua. Like I said, this fight needed to happen 6 years ago or so. But like I said, when you don't adjust, when you don't adapt, these are truly the problems that you run into. But folks, that's going to wrap it up. And as always, I want to take this time out to thank you for tuning into the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast here on YouTube. I want to take this time out to thank all of you fine folks out there. If you haven't, and if you haven't already, please feel free to like and subscribe to this channel. Also, if you're on the X, formerly known as Twitter, please feel free to follow me at 300 Pounds of Sports. And like I always say, if you follow me, it'll be my pleasure to follow you right back. There's also the sports discussion group on Facebook at the Sports Depot 365. You can check it out, drop a line, and be a part of one of the better sports debating sites going on social media. PM Dub, it's been a while, but I definitely appreciate the commentary. Um, I, for one, appreciate like you mentioning David Tua. That's a name out of the past. That's a guy right there that I forgot, but I definitely appreciate that. And Happy New Year to you and yours. And I wish you nothing but the best in the coming years. And I hope to hear from you real soon on this channel. And once again, fine folks, my name is William Martin. I'm signing off and I'm saying thanks once again for tuning into the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast here on YouTube. Be well, everybody.